Okay, great. So we're recording is live. Thank you again for jumping on here. It's a pleasure to speak with you. After reading your stories, I'm even more honored to even speak with you. Miss Kimberly Shannon Murphy, stunts woman, credited with over 130 different projects and whatnot. And yeah, we're just gonna jump right into it. If you want to just kind of give a little overview of who you are and just a little backstory on who Miss Kimberly is.
It's a loaded question. Um, I am a stunt woman for the last 20 years and just recently wrote a book, a memoir about my childhood, my abusive childhood, which is something I've been wanting to do forever, and just really trying to get my story out there to help people because there's not a lot of content on this subject for, I think, obvious reasons. It's a really heavy subject, but also it's a really hard thing, I think, when abuse happens within a family and people have a hard time talking about it. So I'm really trying to open the conversation for it to be something that people are starting to talk about more.
Yep. No, that's great. So I'm gonna jump right into it. Why do you feel like it took you as long as it did for you in order for you to release your story?
Part of it was because I didn't want to hurt people in my life, like in my family, that I knew didn't want the story to be told in this way. And because I have the career that I have now, and because I have some sort of platform, and I have, it's not like I'm coming from nowhere. Like, I have a platform to speak off of. And I think I knew how a lot of my family felt about me talking about it. And so I just didn't want to hurt anybody. And I was also going through my own healing journey as well, which was at, the time where 20 years ago, when I really wanted to write a book, I just wasn't in the headspace to do so. And it wouldn't have came out the way that it did.
Right. No, that makes sense. And now with it being released and obviously people were going to feel some type of way regardless when it didn't really matter when it was released. But did you feel a sense of like a sigh of relief when you were able to tell your story, knowing that not only did it help you in your healing journey, but it also spoke to other people who may be going through something similar?
For me, the most amazing thing was my biggest reason, or my biggest feeling for doing this book, was to turn my pain into purpose. I didn't feel like I had gone through what I had gone through for no reason. Like, there had to be a bigger purpose for it, and that purpose, I really believe, was to help people, because nothing else really made sense to me. I couldn't make sense of something so horrific happening for no reason. So if I can help people by writing this story, which the messages that I've gotten since the book has been released, just from total strangers, and how my story has helped them feel more seen and help them feel less alone, and help them just even tell their story that they've been holding in for years, that they were abused by a family member and never talked about it because they didn't want to upset the family, and that they felt like I gave them the strength to do that. So for me, that's what it was all about from the beginning.
Right. Now, going to the book, you were very self-aware at a very young age at some of the things that were happening around you, and knowing that they weren't okay. But at what point did you really just sit back and realize that stuff like that is just not supposed to happen? I understand that at the age you were very young, and you just knew that, hey, I don't want to be around like your grandfather or whatnot. And what did it feel like at the age, or not at the age, but at what point did you feel as though that, what happened to you is just not normal? Because I can understand that sometimes growing up, certain things that are happening to us, they could feel normal until you get around and you have certain conversations and you start to realize that, okay, this shit isn't normal. Like, this wasn't supposed to happen the way it did. Right.
I honestly think that if I'm going to be completely honest, it was till recently. Because when my grandfather died, I was 11, and I knew, like you're saying, I knew that it wasn't normal. I knew that it didn't feel right, but it was all I knew, and it was my family. And when you're born into a family, you have this attachment to this family. They are the ones that feed you and clothe you and do all of the things. And so you can't really look past that, because literally you're relying on them for your survival. So I feel like when I went through the process of writing this book, I had to separate myself from my family in order to really see the dysfunction that was continuing on because of what had happened to us as a family, because obviously my mom was abused and many other people were. And so in order for me to really look at it from a lens, from like a clear lens, I needed to step away from everyone to see how, it's not like my family went on to be, no one was sexually abusing anybody, but it was, the toxicity, and then it all spills out in different ways. And so then we're having kids, and now it's a whole nother generation. And then when you come from like a trauma-filled childhood, it just sort of, unless you deal with it and heal it, it spills out into your children in many different ways. And so that's what I saw happening.
Right. And did you make your family aware that you were about to begin writing this book before you stepped away, or did you just completely step away altogether?
I made them aware. When I got the book deal, I was in a place where I was like, okay, I have to call everybody and make sure that everybody is okay with me telling my story, and I want everyone to be comfortable, and I want everyone to be okay. And unfortunately, a lot of the reactions weren't positive ones, and were very hurtful for me. And so some of them stepped away from me because they didn't agree with what I was doing. And some of them I then stepped away from because I couldn't write this book from an authentic space while being sort of entrapped in an inauthentic family, which is really what it is. And as much as I love them and I wish them healing and all of those things, it's like you can't have it both ways, unfortunately. You can't heal and be in a good space and then also still be having these conversations and these relationships with people who are not on that path.
Right. And talk to me a little bit about the process of writing this book, because I can only imagine that there were a whirlwind of emotions that you were going through, whether it was with family, your own healing journey, and trying to detail all of these things into this book. And you're also talking about the very people that you're still, like, people are stepping away from you, you're stepping away from them, and you're also trying to talk about them in this book from an authentic standpoint and whatnot. So talk to me about the process of how long and how you were able to put these words on pages and whatnot.
I had an amazing ghostwriter, which was definitely necessary.
Yeah.
And I would sort of just, we did a lot of phone calls. Obviously, she would tape our phone calls, and then we took trips together where we just sort of spent days just talking. It was really important for me for people to feel that it was my personality and me. There's a lot of like also really funny bits in the book, and I'm a very sort of sarcastic person, and I wanted that to come across in the book. I wanted my personality to come across in the book. So it was really important to me that she really understood who I was. Right. And so I would write and she would edit, and that's just kind of how we would do it. She would say, okay, I need you to write about A, B, C, and D. And then I would send her an email that was like a disaster with no commas or, no grammar correct anything. And then she would just make it this beautiful piece of art, basically, which is what I truly feel she did.
Yeah. Now let's talk about your healing journey. So I've done therapy quite a few times myself. And one of the things that I'm grateful for is having someone that just kind of listens or whatnot, and also makes you feel seen, which I think is also very important. So what was it like for you, especially coming from the field that you come from, where you're a very strong woman, you're doing these amazing stunts, but you also have these mental struggles that you may battle with, that you have to deal with? And I stress very frequently to the people around me that no matter how strong you are, no matter how you appear, if you have mental struggles, it's always going to catch up with you, whether it's when you're 20, whether it's when you're 30, whether it's when you're 40, or whether they're going to trickle down to your kids, whatever the case may be. So talk to me a little bit about your healing journey and how you were able to not necessarily overcome, but grow through what you went through.
I started off with doing talk therapy with a therapist in New York, and I probably did that for about 10 years. And that was really sort of the beginning of it. And that was really helpful for me. And then when I was writing the book, I sort of got to a space where I felt like I needed to like dig deeper. I feel like I obviously connected with really amazing doctors who endorsed my book, who have become friends, who then I started working with. And I think it all depends. Like they say, you know, you either have like capital T trauma or, you know, lower T trauma. And, you know, with me, I obviously have capital T trauma. And so talk therapy just became not enough anymore. Like I felt like I needed to like dig deeper into myself in order to fully understand or try to understand what was going on inside of me. And also when I had my daughter, there was just so many things that, you know, writing the book that were happening. So I started doing a lot of psychedelic work, which has really been like life-changing for me.
Got you. And talk a little bit more about that. Like, what does psychedelic work look like?
So it's not legal in the States. So it's kind of like a, you know, it's an interesting world because it's a like an underground tunnel sort of thing. Like you have to know someone to do all the things, but you do the work with a doctor and you do talk therapy before you do what they call the journey. So you have like an integration where you kind of talk about what you want to get out of the journey. And with me, at least, it always showed up in my journey. And then when the day comes, you do, you know, there's various drugs that they'll use. So depending on what the doctor thinks is going to be the best for you. I started off with just doing my first time MDMA. And then the second, I've done 4 journeys so far now. My second one I did MDMA and mushrooms. And it just kind of it takes your fight or flight out. And so it just really gives you this sense of being able to really look at the truth without judgment on yourself. And I think we don't realize how much we actually judge ourselves for things that we have been through or things that have been done to us in our life. And that's what I feel like it took away. And so you're just able to just be in this space of like really just love and really acceptance of what, you know, kind of happened. And it was really, it's really life-changing. And I think they're becoming more and more, I think it will be legal at some point. And it's helped like war veterans and get over their PTSD. And it really does do a lot of amazing stuff. Gotcha.
No, that sounds amazing. So again, going back to the book, I want to just give a moment to people who may be interested in reading it. Just tell us a little short paragraph, I guess you can say, what we can expect from the book while reading it.
Well, I feel like I did a really good job. I wrote this book for survivors, and I wrote this book for my 15-year-old self because I feel like if I would have had this book at 15 when I was really having my memories and going through things, that it would have changed me in ways of just feeling seen. And that's the biggest comment I get from everybody or from, you know, people that message me is that I finally feel seen. Like I feel like I'm not alone. I feel seen. And so I wrote it in such a way where I feel like it's not triggering. So we don't go into details of what actually happened to me. I didn't feel that was necessary. I felt like it was counterproductive. I didn't want people that need this book to feel like, oh my God, I can't read this. I have to, you know, close it. And it's too overwhelming. So I don't talk about details and I don't, you know, it's just, we did it in such a way where you understand the gravity of the abuse without having to like hear about it or to read about it.
Gotcha. And one of my favorite quotes from the book actually is that you had said, sometimes we have to fall apart to feel better. And that's such an important statement because sometimes we hurt ourselves more trying to hold ourselves together, and we watch ourselves crack piece by piece, and we're steady trying to just keep it together rather than just not realizing that if you just let it fall apart, sometimes you can build something better. And I think you did a phenomenal thing with this book. Like I said, it's a phenomenal read. I took so many lessons from it. And it's also good because I think it has a lot of lessons for a lot of different people, not necessarily those who may have went through the exact same thing you went through. But I think childhood trauma is it's something that isn't frequently talked about, but it affects us as adults, whether we realize it or not. And like you said, when you grow up knowing something and the only thing is that it shapes who you are, and yes, it could be detrimental to the people around you when you become an adult, whether it's in your relationships, your friendships, your business relationships, whatever. But those ideologies that you were taught as a child kind of start to trickle over until somebody sits you down. And it's crazy that you have to sit down as an adult and somebody has to tell you like, no, that's wrong. It almost feels like you have to unlearn what you've only been taught. So yes, that is great to know that you've become that self-aware even at such a young age, because I can only imagine that I was nowhere near this self-aware. Like I know there were things happening around in my childhood that I know wasn't okay, that I didn't realize until I was probably about 22, 23 years old. And I had to sit back and be like, damn, that probably shouldn't have went the way it went, but it did. But yeah, so just kind of give a little overview, because I see as your career as a stuntswoman that you took a lot of falls, but you also kept getting up, which I think is very shocking or whatnot. But let's talk a little bit about your career. How did you get into that?
I was a dancer. I danced with Alvin Ailey, and I was a gymnast. So like that kind of I started doing acrobatics and performing around the world and doing like Cirque du Soleil type stuff. And then a lot of my friends were getting in the business and they were like, you should send your stuff. And I didn't think anything was going to come of it. You know, this is when we used to actually like put things in the mail, like with a stamp, and like that's how we would get things places. And so a coordinator called me, like the biggest coordinator called me a week later in New York, and he was doing a movie with Uma Thurman and needed a double, and I got the job. And it was just kind of from then on, I just never stopped working. I just went from like film to film and got connected with a lot of amazing actresses, and so sort of continued with them, and did, you know, I was with Cameron Diaz for a long time, and just, you know, just kind of happened. But, you know, I don't think it's an accident that people in my business, or like fighters, or people that, you know, make that their sort of life choice as a career. I would guess that probably most of us have had some trauma in our life. And I mean, I even know that with a lot of my friends that I've had conversations with, obviously, since the book, that, you know, that they've had a lot of trauma too, that are stunt people. And, you know, there's that really interesting kind of parallel of, you know, of the pain factor of going through the physical pain and the mental pain, and just feeling like you're strong enough to do it because of what you've been through. At least that was my experience. I think looking back is sort of how I sort of phrase it now, is that I think going through getting hurt and things happening to me on set, it was sort of like, you know, in my subconscious, probably like, this is what I deserve, or this is what should be happening in my life, because this is all I've known is pain, whether it's emotional pain on the inside or physical pain on the outside. And so I think it says a lot about how I got, or why I got into the business.
Gotcha. And why do you think you were able to keep coming back? Like, I was reading in the book where you were working on I Am Legend, and I guess one of the rigs had failed, and you kind of fell through and you fell on some shards of glass, but you were able to just get back up and be like, no, let's do it again. What do you think pushes you to want to continue to feel that physical pain?
Well, I will say I'm not in that space anymore, so that's good. But that
Okay.
was very early on in my career,
Yeah.
and part of what we do as stunt people is like that's part of our job. It's like that's why we do it and the actors don't do it. It's part of our job is to be, unless there's an arm falling off, like, okay, we get cut, we're fine. If we can still physically do it, we're doing it. So
Gotcha.
part of it is just our job. And then the other part for me was just, and I talk about this in the book, was just being able to see pain or see that I was hurt physically on the outside was something at that time in my life that I really needed. It's almost like people that cut themselves. It just felt like I was getting attention for my pain, but what I was really needing was attention for the pain that was happening inside. But I was getting attention for the pain that was on the outside, and that was helpful to me because at that time in my life, I wasn't getting help for what was going on inside.
Gotcha. And how do you think the relationship with your parents kind of shaped you? I know you had mentioned that your dad was a war veteran, and he even suffered for some level of PTSD that you kind of experienced when you were younger. And in seeing those type of things and the relationship you had with your mother, how do you think that kind of shaped you into who you are now? And I know you also entered motherhood yourself. So how do you think those experiences and everything that you've learned and everything that you've experienced so far have kind of shaped you into not only being in your career, but also as a mother and also as a friend, you know?
Yeah. I think with my father, I don't speak to my father anymore. That was something that I needed to walk away from for my own mental health. And, it definitely breaks my heart because I think when he got out of the war, it wasn't something that, society is much different now than it was then. And he was there in the 70s. And it wasn't like, therapy wasn't something people did or people went to, especially my father. And so he never dealt with the things that he went through in war. And he was on the front lines. He was a minesweeper. So he was like out in the field. It wasn't like he was sitting behind a desk. He was doing all the things.
Right.
And I, my biggest thing was that I really had to look at when I wrote the book was everyone's part that they played in sort of allowing the abuse to happen, because ultimately that is what happened, because the abuse that I suffered was happening while adults were around and in the same house. And so I think because of my father's trauma, because of what he had been through in his life and not dealt with, he wasn't able to be a fully present father. And because my mother was abused her whole life, she wasn't able to be a fully present mother, which was an interesting thing that Dr. Matei, he's famous trauma doctor, had said to me in one of our conversations. He said, Kim, your first trauma was actually the lack of adult support. You didn't have adult support around you, because if you did, right, the abuse would have never happened. And I think that's so important for people to understand who have been through something, because if you decide to have children and you don't deal with it, we just keep repeating the same patterns. It may not be like, my father didn't sexually abuse me, but his trauma bled out onto me, and my mother's trauma bled out onto me as well, which is right, how the abuse was able to even happen. So I think it's just so important that we deal with what we've been through in our life as children, and that we really look at that in a non-shameful way, which I think is really hard to do. And I don't think people realize how much shame they actually carry with them, no matter what they've been through. And I think sometimes that becomes so large that it almost doesn't allow us to heal or get to a better place for our children.
Gotcha. And that's a great thing. So I'll give a little insight into myself. So I didn't know my dad. So I'm 28. I didn't know my dad until I turned 25. He
Wow.
randomly tried to come back into my life. He messaged me on Instagram, ironically.
That had to have been really jarring for you.
Yeah, so it was interesting, and obviously, I first person I told was my mom. Like, what is happening right now? I don't understand why he decided to come around after all of this time. So I say all of that to say, because you mentioned you had to walk away from your dad, and it's not like I didn't try to build a relationship with my father. I definitely tried, but it got to a point where, and I tell people all the time, the easy thing would have been to just pretend like nothing happened, let him come back around, whatever, right? The hard thing to do is to walk away, right? Because that's a big portion of my life that I don't think he really understood that was lacking. Because I'm thinking back, for 25 years, who knows what my life would have looked like had I had a father figure there, but I didn't, right? So let's talk a little bit about how hard it was for you to walk away from your father or whatnot, and how that aided in your own mental journey for your own healing.
We all want to belong to our parents. I mean, they're the ones who brought us into the world, right? And I'm sure when you got the message from your dad, you felt a million emotions. And one of them probably was, oh my gosh, I want my dad, that child part of you, and I think that's another part of therapy that I do a lot of, which is IFS, which is like working with parts of ourselves that got stunted in our trauma. So like, the 7-year-old part of me that went through this traumatic thing never actually grew up. And so when I'm triggered, I respond from a 7-year-old space. And with my father, it just became the same conversations over and over. And every time I got off the phone with him, I felt just so much sadness and so much pain. And it took me years to do it. It wasn't like it was an overnight thing, but I got to a point where I was like, why am I doing this to myself? He's not going to change. I even went to the point where I like wrote him a letter, like a 10-page letter. Cause I'm like, he doesn't hear me when I speak. He just speaks over me and he's just saying what he needs to say. So I'm like, okay, maybe if I sit down and write him a letter and explain my feelings, that we can heal and we can get to a better place. It's not like I didn't want him in my life. And he never responded to the letter or it. And he just wasn't supportive of my life in general. He didn't agree with my dancing. He thought, he was a very, like, if you either work a 9-to-5 job or like you either fit in this box or you don't. And so it was uncomfortable for him that I was a different kid. I was like a more creative. I don't want to sit behind a desk. Like I want to explore the world and do different things. And he was never supportive in that. And that was really difficult for me. And I was always constantly trying to impress him. And it wasn't until he like saw me on television that I felt like I was good enough for him.
Right.
And so I just got to a point where I felt like every time I talked to him, I was literally beating my head against the wall, and that nothing was ever going to change.
Gotcha. So how do you go about forgiveness? I know the adults in your life when you were younger, you said everyone pretty much played a part in what you went through, but how do you go about forgiving them for allowing that to happen?
I don't like believe in it, actually.
You don't believe in forgiveness?
No, I do.
Gotcha.
Well, I shouldn't say I don't believe in forgiveness, because I think there's some things that are forgivable and there are some things that are not forgivable. And I think a lot of people, and everyone is on their own journey and has to do things the way they feel is right for them. But for me, I think there are some things that happen to you in your life that an adult might have done to you in your life that it's okay not to forgive. And I don't forgive my grandfather for what he did. And I don't forgive my parents for not being there. And I can not forgive them and move on and move forward. And it's okay. Like I can do that. My mom and I have a relationship. My mom knows how I feel. I'm able to have a relationship with my mom because she hears me and she listens to me and we talk about it. And my mom was also a victim too. So I can have a relationship with my mom and still not forgive what she didn't do for me as a child.
Mm. And what are those initial conversations like with your mom when you just really have to sit her down and just really explain to her, how you feel, and also explaining to her that, you will likely never forgive her for what has happened and what she allowed to happen. So what are those conversations like, and how does she take the words that you kind of express to her?
She's actually gotten better at listening and hearing me. And really, that's such a huge part of the healing process, I think, is just being heard. Because as a child, I obviously wasn't heard, or I wasn't taken care of, or I wasn't, I wasn't parented. I don't, and that's the thing too. Now I'm a mom. And so now I'm having to learn how to parent my child when I didn't have parents, which is a tricky thing.
And now with you being a mother, how do you necessarily go to your child? Are you plan to express to your child what you went through one day, of course, but how important is it to you to really be present and to also hear your child?
Those two things have been life-changing for me, because she is obviously, and I hate to even say this because I don't mean this in a bad way. She's a trigger for me in a lot of ways, because especially through writing this book, I started writing this book when she was 6. So now she's 9. And, being able to provide her with this amazing life that I've been able to give her doesn't mean that I don't have moments where I'm like, I don't know how to do this. Like, I didn't have a mom. I didn't have a present parent. So she'll come at me with things, and she's very intuitive and she's very smart, and she just wants to know all the things. And so sometimes I feel like when I'm parenting her, I'm like parenting myself too, you know, and I just try to like be really slow when I talk to her, so that I'm very like my intent is there when I'm speaking to her, and I'm not coming from a dishonest space. She does know some things that are appropriate for her to know, because obviously, doing all these things, I have a rule in my house where we always tell the truth no matter what, and she knows that, so she uses that against me. She's like, Mom, you said we always tell the truth in this house. So I've had to have really hard conversations with her about things, and I just sort of explain it to her, like, Mommy didn't have the life that you have, and I'm so grateful that I can provide this life for you. And also, Mommy's human, and Mommy doesn't always say the right thing or do the right thing. And I need you to be able to forgive me. And I just, I grew up in an era that was like, this is, you listen to the adults, you don't question the adults, what the adults say go, and that's it. So there's never space for a child, at least when I was growing up, to question anything. Where I want her to always feel like she can question everything and feel like she's safe to do that. So it's definitely a struggle on a daily, I wouldn't say a struggle, but it's definitely something I have to be conscious about every day with her as I'm parenting her, because, and I'm sure I'm not making assumptions, but, you not having a dad in your life, I mean, am I allowed to ask you a question?
Absolutely.
How do you feel about having children, and how do you feel about being a dad, and what does that look like for you in your mind?
Right. So I think we share similar ideologies in that regard, in terms of so me not having a father kind of taught me to be resilient, of course, and when I do have kids, it's also going to teach me to, the most important thing to me is to be present, right? So for me, when it comes to my kids, I just want to be present, and that means being present in a way that they feel seen, heard. They feel respected. Like you
Mhm.
said, I want my kids to question the world if they have to. They're allowed to do that, but also, and that was the same way for me growing up. I didn't have the place to be able to question things. Like for whatever was said, that was just law. It was like a law. You
Mhm.
know, no means no, yes means yes. If this is said, that's just what it is, right? And it was a thing. If I did question it, it got framed as talking back, right? So for me, it's going to be in terms of, hey, if my kid has a question, and it doesn't matter how ridiculous the question is, right? It doesn't matter what type of question it is. If it's a genuine question, it's a question,
Yeah.
right? That deserves an answer. And I think for me, that's how I want my kids to grow up and just know I'm there no matter what, right? Regardless of whatever we go through, regardless of whatever is said, whatever questions are being asked, I just want to be present. I just want to be there. I want to teach my kids certain things that I didn't have growing up or whatnot. And that came from just a complete lack of having a father, right? It's not like my father was like in and out. He just wasn't there completely.
Mhm.
And I ask people all the time that, well, people ask me all the time that, do I wish my father was just kind of like in and out, or am I glad he just wasn't there altogether? And I'm actually more glad that he just wasn't there altogether, because I can only imagine the trauma that he probably would have left being in and out, and the
Mm.
things that would have done to me. And I'm also grateful for the support system that I had growing up. So I have 5 siblings, and 2 of them
Mm.
are older brothers, and they played that father figure extremely well. And I couldn't ask for more than what they did. And also my mom being very aware of what the circumstances were, and also made sure that I wasn't lacking in that regard. You know what I mean? She
Mm.
stepped up to the plate very well. We never had a conversation about my father growing up because she never made me feel like I needed to.
Mm.
Right. So I'm also grateful for that they made me feel very secure in the childhood that I was being brought up in. Right.
Yeah.
So, but again, to answer your question, I want to have kids that know I'm there. That's the
Yeah.
most important thing, and present in the right ways. I don't want to be the dad that's just, you know, I provide you with the life and that's all you get. You know what I mean? I
Mhm.
want my kids to know I'm emotionally there, I'm
Yeah.
physically there, if I'm spiritually there, I'm there in every way that they're ever going to need me. So yeah, that's to answer your question. But
Sounds like your mom did a good job.
yeah, absolutely, she did, especially with the cards she was dealt. So I'm also a twin, so it also wasn't easy
Oh,
for me.
wow.
Yeah, so we had double trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it obviously was not easy for her, and you know, we obviously had our struggles and whatnot, but she absolutely did the best she could with the cards she was dealt.
Yeah.
And but yeah, that's a great question, by the way. But talk to me a little bit about why is it important for your household to be a truthful household?
Oh my God, because I grew up in like one big lie of a household. Everything
Mm,
was a secret. Everything was, like you said, everything the adults said was law. There was no space to be myself. And I feel like a lot of people say this, like, my trauma made me stronger, or my trauma made me. And I used to say that and feel that way.
mm,
But I actually feel the opposite now, where sometimes when I get into a space where I'm just like, oh, I really wish it would be nice to know what my life would have looked like without it,
mm,
because I do know that I have overcome a lot, and I do know that I've, made, had a great career and done all these, an outsider looking in, like, I've done well for myself. But it would be nice to know what it would have looked like if I didn't have all of that stuff as well. And I
right.
want my daughter to feel like, no matter what the truth is that she needs to tell me, that this is a safe space for her, and that she can always tell me the truth. I mean, now we have so much vocabulary and language around things. Like,
Mm.
I don't think I knew what a boundary was until I was in my late 30s. Like, I just, it wasn't even something that was spoken about, where now I'm
Right.
like, to my daughter, this is a boundary, and your friend is crossing a boundary, and you need to respect yourself, and you need to be really careful in who you let have access to your life, because all of that makes you and builds you to who you are as an adult as you grow up. So I just want her, and I think sometimes I do it to a fault, where my husband's like, okay, she's 9, But I'm just like, everything is like, there's no lies that happen here ever. Everything is just honest, no matter what it is.
Right. And how important is it to you to allow your child to be as creative as possible? Because I know you spoke about, in your household, you were kind of limited. You were kind of held inside of a box. And then when you kind of branched out and you became this amazing stunts woman, or you were dancing, you were an acrobat, and it turned out you were this very creative person that you just kind of weren't allowed to be in your youth. So how important is it for you to allow your child to just kind of just be this creative, or just let them kind of flourish in the ways that you want them to flourish in?
Yeah, so important. I say that to her all the time. She's an amazing soul, and I tell her that every day. And I compliment her every day. That's one big thing too, that my father was, very good at not, acknowledging accomplishments that I had throughout my life, which I think really affected me. And so she's like super athletic. My husband's a stuntman, or was for a long time. He directs now, but he was a stuntman for a long time. So she got both of our genes. So she's like a athletic psychopath. So it's like everything she tries or does she does very well. And I tell her all the time, I want her to grow up, and I want her to find something that she loves to do, so that when she goes to work, she doesn't ever feel like she's working. That it's coming from a place in her heart that she wakes up in the morning and she's excited about her day, and not feeling like, oh, I have to go to work, that it's something that she creates. And I literally probably say to her every day, I'm like, Capri, it's all about like manifesting what you want and making it happen, because you can do literally anything you want to do, because your mind is so powerful. And even if your body may be telling you, or you may be second guessing yourself, like if you can just sit in that space of, I can do this, I don't care what anyone else says, because as you know, like when things start going well for you in your life, there's a lot of people that have a lot of things to say that may not be doing so well in their life. And you might be doing something that is so, like they can't comprehend, because they can't do it themselves. And so then they put their insecurities on you. Right. And so I say to her all the time, I'm like, your mind is the most powerful tool you have. So as long as you believe you can do it, like you can do it. And I just want her to always feel that way and live that way.
Yep. And while you were writing your book, how important was your support system to you? Like your daughter, your husband, how did they play a part in you getting through that process of writing this book?
My daughter, I was careful with, because obviously of her age, but my husband has been so supportive of me writing this book. And obviously you read it. I don't hold back in the sense of more when it goes through my 20s of like bad decisions that I made in my 20s, like we all do, but but I speak very candidly about them, and he never had a problem with it. And he was always, on board of like, speak your truth, tell your story, do what you need to do. Don't listen to what anyone has to say. And and then I have like my own team here that has been amazing and been kind of with me every step of the way of doing this, that I definitely couldn't have done without it. You sort of start, when you get healthier, like some people start weeding out of your life, and then it makes room for the other people to come into your life that are meant for your like next level.
For sure. Now, let's get into those bad decisions, because so obviously, like you said, we all make bad decisions. We all make mistakes. We all do dumb things eventually. And so how important is it to you to not only acknowledge those mistakes and those decisions, but also take the initiative to learn from them?
I think I've just learned from them in the past probably 10 years. In my 20s, when you're living it, and obviously like a lot of survivors either become extremely like promiscuous or the opposite, and I became extremely promiscuous. And I think that has a lot to do with just not feeling like your body belongs to you because it was used as an object your whole life. And so then as you get older, it just sort of manifests into that. And I felt like it was really important to tell those stories because no matter what kind of trauma you've had, like you said, in our 20s, we all make stupid decisions. I mean, you're still in your 20s, so, you know, but you're like how old are you? 20?
28. I turn 29 next month.
Okay. You're almost at 30. You're good. You're almost there. You know, but I think that, that we all make bad decisions. And I wanted that part to me in the book. It was really important to me because I think it relates to everybody, and no matter what we've had. And then sometimes, look, sometimes something might happen to us when we're 18. You know, like we might be raped or some traumatic thing happens to us, and then, you know, we could have had the best life ever, but it throws you upside down, and then you're, you know, dealing with that, and then you start making bad decisions when maybe you never did before. So I wanted to be really transparent about that because I think that people are afraid to talk about those moments because you're technically an adult. So you're the one who like made the decisions. Like it's easy to say, you know, not easy to say, but like, oh, I was abused as a child, and you can completely take your fault out of that. But when you're an adult you're, you know, making those choices yourself, you're responsible for those choices because you're an adult. Right. So I wanted all of those things in there so that people hopefully, you know, again, feel less alone in that we're not perfect humans and we all make stupid choices.
Right.
It's all about what we do with them.
Exactly. So what advice would you give someone who is experiencing that type of trauma, maybe just entering their 20s, but you also want them to not make the same mistakes? Some of them may be unavoidable, but what advice would you give to someone who may be on the path to possibly making those same mistakes?
Just to be really mindful about who you're surrounding yourself with. I think that's a massive thing, right? Because in our 20s, we sort of, I think in general, we disconnect from our family a little bit. We start to figure out who we are. We start to figure out what we want to do. And I think that just happens naturally. And so who we keep in our circle, I wish that I would have known or felt more of this when I was in my 20s, which is that putting yourself around people that are doing like more than you, bigger things, like that you're sitting around talking about ideas and not people, and that you're having different conversations, and that it's not, that you're not surrounding yourself with toxic people, no matter whether that's family or friends. And when you get into your 20s, you can make all of those choices. And I think that makes a huge difference to how we can move through this world in a more positive way.
I think that's very important. So I started my social media career when I was about 19 years old, and things progressed very fast. So I didn't necessarily have the opportunity to kind of just live my life a little bit, because everything just kind of progressed so fast, whether it was financially, in my business relationships. But when I seen that start to happen, I started to notice that my relationship with my family started to kind of deteriorate a little bit. Mainly with my mom, because she didn't really understand what I was doing, because social media as a career was just kind of looked at as stupid back in the day. Like, who does that? They're like, being an influencer wasn't a thing. So we started to have our own kind of issues, whatnot, and she didn't really want me to do it, and she didn't really understand it, and she just couldn't wrap her head around it. And she was like, then I was moving out. She was like, okay, now he's moving out. Now I'm worried. And obviously I'm the baby of the family too. So I always have that title. So I don't get to just do what I want to do, if you let my mom tell it. But so in doing all of that, I started to have to realize that I have to be more forthcoming about what I'm doing, because I just be like, oh yeah, I just do social media. She's just like, what the hell does that mean? What's going on here? And it made me realize that I had to start to sit my mom down to really just have conversations with her and whatnot, because before it was just, whatever she said, that was law, like I said. So as I became an adult, I started to realize that our conversations needed to change. We need to have adult conversations now, like from man to woman, or as even as son and mother. But those conversations need to evolve, and I think for a long time I prevented them from evolving because I always let her have her way. And we even got into this big argument when I was about 21, and it's so funny. I remember having this argument. I remember my siblings calling me and be like, "Yo, what happened?" Like, da da da, because that was the first time me and my mom ever had a heated argument. And I remember telling her, like, that probably needed to happen because I wanted you to see me as an adult and you kept seeing me as a child. But now I forced you to see me as an adult and whatnot. So, and that also taught me that having those conversations is important, but just not just only with my mom, but with my friends too. Because again, when I came up into my career, everything happened so fast. So my friends started to feel left behind. Because my career obviously evolved at a rate that I couldn't even fathom myself. So things started to become different around me. Like I started to do different things. I started to move different. And my friends started to feel like I switched up, I changed or whatnot. And that's a part of me. Of course I changed because the things around me changed. That's normal. And I started to have to kind of just cut some friends off because they wanted me to live a life in the same kind of life that I no longer wanted to live. I no longer want to go hang out in the streets. I no longer want to go to a party and smoke marijuana and do all of these different things. Like my life is different now. I want to elevate into this. So it is important in your 20s to know when it's okay to lose friends. And because there's always the opportunity to make more. Put yourself in rooms with people of like minds, and that's what's going to help you elevate. So I'm glad you said that. But I definitely made mistakes along the way because, again, I was thrown into a life that I had no expectation of being in. Mind you, I was a shy kid growing up. So all of this was not it wasn't in my future, in my head. Because I was quiet. Like my mom used to say I didn't talk. Like if we went to family gatherings, I was the child that didn't talk. Like if you said something to me, it was kind of like a head nod type of thing.
Oh, that's so interesting.
So which is why I also think it's important that allowing a child to be creative and just kind of flourish is very important, because I didn't necessarily have that growing up. I was just kind of shaped into a box. Like I was told to just play sports. That was it, right? I didn't really get the opportunity to really just kind of branch off and just kind of open up a little bit. And I kind of see a lot of that in you as well, because like you said, you were kind of put into a box. Now you're just an amazing person and all of these different things. So yeah, most definitely. But I kind of want to get to after your 20s and you've made all of these bad decisions. What was it like when you just kind of have to look in the mirror and be like, look, if you want things to be different, you have to change the things that you're doing?
I think when I got into stunts, that was a really, really elevated me in the sense of who I was around, right? Because now I was surrounded by celebrities. So people that were like really, really successful. And, I always talk about Cameron because I feel like the day that I met her is when things really shifted for me, because the way that she moved in the world when I met her, and still does now, but I've known her for 20 years now, was so incredible to me and so mesmerizing, because she was just this, at that time, probably one of the biggest actresses on the planet.
Right.
And she was just like lovely and gracious and, looked everyone in the eye when she spoke to them and just was so kind. And I realized that watching her and like kind of, really in awe of her, of how much I was not that. And it wasn't like I was comparing myself to her. It was just more like, that's more of who I want to be. Like, I want to be surrounded by people like that. Like, I want to be surrounded by people who, who make people smile, who make people feel good, who give that, you know, when someone would walk away from her, you could just see that she like gave them something just by being herself. And I realized how much that was lacking in my own self, partly because I was so insecure and so uncomfortable in my own body that I didn't feel like I had anything to give anybody. And so when I started spending time with her, and then, you know, all the women around her, it gave me a lot of empowerment, and them seeing special parts in me that I didn't even see myself gave me a lot of empowerment. And then I feel like from then on, I was just kind of like, okay, this is the caliber of people, not because she was famous, but just because of who she was as a human, that I want to be around. Like, I want to, you know, inspire people. I want to make people smile. I want to make them feel good. I want to make them feel like they walked away from a conversation with me and they feel better about themselves. I don't want to be surrounded by, you know, people that are just like clubbing every night and doing all these things. Like, that's not what I want. And then through the business, I got to travel the world, which, you know, as you know, when you travel, you just learn so much, and it, I think, helps you grow so much as well. So I think that was like a pivotal moment in my life where it really just changed me and changed my thought process and where I wanted to be in the world and what I wanted my life to sort of look like.
And what do you think that process was like in wanting to be the type of person that someone speaks to, they walk away smiling, or their heart is warm? What do you think that process was like in trying to become that? Because you are now, but what were the steps that you had to take to be like, okay, look, if I want to, you're surrounded by this, if I want to elevate and become that type of person, what do I need to do?
Yeah. I think it was really confusing in the beginning because I didn't have anybody, you know, besides the people I was meeting to really have that conversation with. It wasn't like I was going to, you know, second day of meeting Cameron Diaz, like sit her down and be like, hey, so can you like let me in on how to, it was almost like I was just discovering myself for the first time. You know, I felt like I was in survival mode for so much of my life. And I never, and I wrote this in the book too, I literally never saw myself living past 30. And not because I felt suicidal, because it wasn't that. I just didn't feel like I could picture a future for myself because I was so busy just like trying every day just to get through the day because of how much pain I was in. So that was just having to really dig inward and just really start doing the work. And it took a really long time. I mean, like, 20 years, not to be depressing for those of you who might be watching and thinking that it happens overnight, because it definitely doesn't. But I feel like it's one of those things where you take one big step forward and then one day you may feel like you just took a big step back, and that's okay, because that's all part of the process of growing and healing. And you just can't be so hard on yourself, and you have to just learn from your mistakes and like get up and move on. And you know, my biggest thing too is, and even going through the whole book process for me, because this is like a new world for me. So it's kind of like, I feel like I'm getting into stunts again and trying to prove myself or whatever it is. But just that, you know, a closed door is not a closed door. It's a redirection that you weren't supposed to go that way. And I feel like I've trusted the universe more in the last 10, 15 years, where I'm just like, okay, just because someone said no, that doesn't mean that you're not good enough. That means that's not where you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be somewhere else. And if they didn't say no, you wouldn't be able to be that somewhere else.
Right.
When you give it a little time, you're like, oh, that's why that happened. Because if that didn't happen that way, then this wouldn't be happening now. And so I think just trusting the process and trusting the universe and trusting yourself is something that is just like super important.
Gotcha. And how hard was it for you to get to that point? Because I know there were some times, especially early on in my career, where if somebody told me no, I just felt like I wasn't good enough. I never really thought about it in terms of, okay, maybe that's just not where I'm supposed to be, or maybe it's just not meant for me, and that's fine. So explain how important it was for you to realize that, you know, if somebody told you no, that just meant it just wasn't for you. It doesn't mean you're not good enough. It just meant that door is just not meant for you to go through.
I think that there's still times that things happen in my life now where I do, something will happen and I feel rejected and I feel, you know, but then I have to kind of talk myself out of it and say, okay, Kim, like, you didn't work this hard for no reason. Like, there, you know, there is a bigger purpose out there, and whatever you believe in, God or spiritually or whatever you are, that there is something out there, that there is like a plan for you. And I do believe that. And so I don't think it's something that I ever fully shut off, because I think that I definitely can go to that space sometimes when I want something really bad and it doesn't happen. And then I'm like, oh God, you know, I knew it. It was, you know, feeling sorry for myself, but I try to make those moments very short-lived and then kind of, you know, say to myself, okay, Kim, this just wasn't meant for you. And we're just going to keep pushing forward. And that's what makes you successful anyway. In whatever you choose to do, is the people that make it. No one sees all the stuff behind the scenes that you're doing to get to that space, but it's the ones that don't give up that make it.
Right.
You know, it doesn't make you smarter, better, or anything else than the person, you know, behind you that may have given up 3 years ago. It just means that you didn't give up and you just kept pushing and pushing. And that's why you got where you got. So I truly believe that. I don't think it's, you know, that some of us are just smarter and we're just meant for, I just think it's the ones that refuse to give up and work really, really hard to get what they want and have something that you really believe in, and you just keep pushing for it, and it eventually will come to you and happen. But if you give up, it never will.
Gotcha. And I live by a quote that, you know, one of my old sports coaches told me a while back, and that's, hard work would always beat talent when talent doesn't work hard. And that's very important, because you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't work for it, if you don't work or you don't continue to do the work behind the scenes, it won't mean anything. But the person that's going to come in and work every day, perfect their craft, and continue to do the work behind the scenes every day, they're the ones who, like you said, they don't give up. And they're the ones who are always going to keep chasing that success. And they're always going to, I think for me, it's that I don't never look at success as like an end goal type of thing, right? I always feel like there can always be something better. There could always be something that I could do more in, whether that's in my family relationships, with the spouse, friends, anything. I'm never satisfied with what currently is, because I feel like we can always continue to grow. We can always continue to do better. We can always continue to inspire more people. If you inspired 100 people, you can aim to inspire 1,000 people. If you inspire 1,000 people, you can inspire 1,000,000, you know? So I frequently never say I'm successful, because I always just want to keep chasing the idea of it, right? Because I feel like that's what continues to push me to work hard behind the scenes, because I'm never satisfied. I want to continue to be hungry.
Yeah, which is why you'll always achieve what you want to achieve. And there's something, that's a great quote that you said. I've never heard that before. And there's something that Morgan Friedman said that I go by a lot. And I'm going to get it totally wrong, but it's basically like, he says something like, you know, we all have stuff that we've been through in our life, you know, but the bus runs every day.
Yep.
So you either are on the bus or you're not on the bus. You know, you're either running to chase the bus or you're at home feeling sorry for what happened to you. And yes, we all have those days and we all have those moments, and that's completely understandable. But yeah, the bus runs every day, and you either choose to get on it or you don't. And I think that makes the biggest difference in whether we keep pushing forward towards success or we don't.
Yep, for sure. And that's the advice I give my friends, somewhere along the lines of that. Even when they're going through something and they're feeling sorry for themselves, or they're beating themselves up about something, I say the same thing. I was like, the sun's going to come up tomorrow. And, you know, it's going to continue to rise every single day. So either you're going to sit there and you're going to rise with it, or you're just going to continue to be in the same state. And like I said, the world's going to continue to spin. It doesn't stop just because you stop.
Yes.
So you're going to have another birthday. You're going to continue to get older. You know, those days are going to keep coming. So either you can learn from whatever mistake you made or whatever was done. You grow through it. You have conversations about it, and that's in no way telling anybody to ignore what you're going through, right?
Right.
But it's also to be self-aware that you have to have those conversations and to be open about the things that you're doing and the things you're going through in order to continue to live those days, in order to continue to make the next few days better, right? Or they're just going to continue to be those same hurt, whether you're pissed off. And I have a rule for myself. I try to clear my mind every night because I don't want to wake up the next day feeling a certain way due to something that happened yesterday, right?
Yeah.
I like to get everything, and I journal a lot as well, so I like to get everything in front of me on paper. Have a conversation with, I need to call my mom or a friend, just kind of get everything in the air, so that way when I wake up tomorrow, I know I've expressed everything already, so I can start the day fresh, because again, that sun is gonna rise, right?
Yeah.
And we all know rain never lasts. Rain comes and goes. That's normal. So I think it's important that you take every day and you attack it the best you can, but also to clear your mind at night, because nobody wants to wake up the next day and still be depressed or still have thoughts of things that you didn't address yesterday when you had the opportunity. And I feel like we all have opportunities in life to kind of just address the things that we're going through. And that's not necessarily to say that you have to go and talk to somebody or you have to go and call a friend, but you can always write it down. You can always talk to yourself. You can always put those things out in the air, because I'm a firm believer where I feel like when you say things out loud, it makes it feel better, right? If you constantly just sit around thinking about it, it's like, damn, okay. But I feel like saying it out loud, like, damn, I'm not okay. That, to me, that's like a sigh of relief. It's like, okay, I was able to admit it. Whether you don't have to admit it to anybody, but it's like a form of just admitting it to yourself. And once you accept that,
internalizing it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So once you put that out in the air, you just you're able to deal with it a little bit differently, rather than if you're just internalizing it, like you said.
Yeah. And I have a picture of my child self on my mirror, because I do like a lot of inner child work. And that for me has been really important, because I do have those days, and I think it's important to recognize that too. Like, yeah, there are going to be those days. We all have those days, and however we choose to deal with them, whether that's, depending on what has happened to us in our life. I think journaling is amazing. I've been doing it. I mean, that's how this all happened in the first place. It started from me journaling. And my aunt, who's like a big presence in the book, that's all she did. And that's how I got so much of her writing in the book, because she's deceased now, but was because that's all she did was journal. And, getting it out and speaking it and talking it is so important. And there's so much available to us now that wasn't available 20 years ago.
For sure.
That you can do in like the privacy of your own home, and go on YouTube and watch a million doctors speak about whatever's, you need to hear is going on with you. So I feel like that's such a gift and such a blessing, as much as the internet can be both of those things. That to me has been such a huge thing that's helpful, especially for those who do feel, kind of incapacitated for what has happened to them in their life. If it's been something, that's really too much for them they feel too much for them to handle.
Right. And going to the book, once it was finished and it was released, how did it make you feel to hear so many people come to you and tell their stories and what they went through, and how you inspired them and also helped them through their journey and through their trauma?
It's been really, it's the biggest blessing of this book, I have to say, because now that I am, detached from my family, which, honestly, I hope is not always the case. And I hope that things shift and change, and who knows what 5 years down the road will look like, because it's not something that makes me feel great that I don't have a relationship with anybody. But it's those stories, and those, like, most of the social media I do is Instagram. So like, people will message me and I always answer, or I try to answer as many as I can. And that's what really keeps me going, and knowing that, like, okay, Kim, you're actually, helping this person, like you're making, they're sitting here like telling you, like one person was like, oh my gosh, my mom brought me your book and she read it and she gave it to me and she told me for the first time that she was abused as a child. And this is like a 60-year-old woman. And she's like, I just wanted to say thank you because I always knew that there was something that my mom had been through that she wasn't talking to me about. And it's brought us so much closer. And if you didn't write this book, that would have never happened.
Right.
So just getting those messages is so amazing for me because, I think even if it helps 100 people, like that, it just makes me feel really good that it's giving people a sense of, like a sense of just being seen and a sense of not feeling alone. And yeah, so that's been really nice.
Gotcha. And going back, I know you mentioned that you were detached from your family and that you hope that one day those things could change. And I just want to ask, because I know for my family, I do have boundaries and I do have expectations, right? And I think that's important, especially from a family standpoint, that there are certain things that can't be crossed and there's certain things I just won't put up with. And there's also things that I expect from not only just my brothers or my sister, but from my mom as well. And so I say all of that to ask, what type of boundaries and expectations have to kind of be met in order for you to have a successful relationship with your family?
Well, we had an instance that happened last summer where my daughter was left out of a event because everyone was angry with me. And that's when everything sort of fell apart in the sense of the people that didn't walk away from me that I was still having a relationship with were a part of that. And, it was something like she wasn't invited somewhere, but she knew that she wasn't. And so it like broke her heart and she cried for days. And that was when I finally realized that I didn't actually really have boundaries with my family, that I just sort of let everyone treat me how they felt they needed to treat me in the moment. And when I saw it happening to my daughter, it just took on a whole other life. And, I expressed to them, it was interesting because then they sent her a gift on Christmas and they said, she had gotten it out of the mailbox before I could. And the card said something like, "We love you so much." And she said to me, "Mommy, that's so confusing because if they love me so much, why wouldn't they have invited me and included me to be with my cousins? Like I'm a good person." And just those words coming out of her mouth for me as an 8-year-old was just so honest and so just, innocent that I realized that I didn't have proper boundaries set up with my family, which is what allowed them to treat her that way. And so that's when I had to just say, like, look, she doesn't need a Christmas present. She needs an apology. And like, then we can move on from there. And the apology was never given. And so that was pretty much that. And so in that situation, I realized that, yes, I didn't actually have boundaries with anybody. And I was sort of became like a people pleaser. I got to a point in, we grew up, we didn't have a lot of money. So when I got into the business and I was like doing well and making money, I sort of used that as like my people pleasing with my family. I was like, "Oh, you can't do that. Oh, I'll pay for that, or I'll do that, or I'll, and I was just trying to make everybody happy. But in that, I wasn't like fulfilling my own self and I wasn't taking care of my own self. And I just, I didn't have boundaries with them. And so, I think it's interesting because when I put them up, it's kind of when everyone was like, "Yeah, you're like difficult," then I became like the difficult one because I was like, "No, I'm not. This is not how I'm going to do things. And this is not what life is going to look like for my daughter. And this is not this is not okay." And I think when you are in a toxic family system, which is what my family unfortunately is, boundaries don't really actually exist.
Right. And how did it necessarily make you feel that they tried to frame you as the difficult one?
Oh, I've always been framed as that.
Yeah.
You know, I think part of that, you know, I went from being like the dramatic child to the difficult one. And I know it's just like literally because I speak my truth and I just say things how it is and nobody wants to hear it. You know, everyone just wants to, I call it like playing house and pretend like everything's fine. And I'm like, yeah, we don't need to sit around and talk about our childhood all day long, but we at least need to acknowledge it. And we need to acknowledge that it happened and that it has affected us. And that if we can do that, then we can do better.
I think you're kind of cutting out.
Oh, sorry. Am I?
Yeah.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah. There we go. You were kind of frozen for a sec there.
Sorry.
No worries.
Okay. Can you hear me? Am I good?
Yeah, you're good now.
Okay. So yeah, I think you just don't have boundaries in a family like mine because nobody knows how to operate with them because they operated so long without them.
And how do you think the conversations in your family evolved, like from your childhood to like your early 20s to you now being successful? How did those conversations kind of evolve? Because you say you were the dramatic child and you were kind of framed that because you always spoke your truth. And so how did it go from you speaking your truth as a child to now you continuing to speak your truth? How do you think they still perceive that in those conversations?
I just don't think they can handle it. And I think that that's just their trauma. And I think it's just the way that they've chosen to deal with their trauma is not the way I've chosen to deal with mine. And I'm too confronting to them. That's how I really feel like it is. Because if I was to have a conversation with them now, I feel like it would be very much, well, you said this, and, you know, like the tit for tat like thing, instead of, you know, you're missing like this, you know, everything that the reason why we're actually having these problems is because of where we've come from. It's not about like the little things that we've said to each other over the years that maybe we've hurt each other's feelings. It's so much bigger than that. And I believe that they believe that they're doing their children a favor by not acknowledging it. And I have just always felt the opposite.
Gotcha. And I can relate a little bit to that. So, you know, I was always the kid that you didn't want to argue with. Why? Because I'm going to tell the truth, and I'm going to say everything that's on my mind. And even now into my adulthood, I don't get phone calls about what's going on in the family because they know I'm going to tell so much truth that it's going to be hurtful. So I don't get told anything because nobody wants to hear what I got to say about it. So that's kind of the way that I guess my family has established boundaries with me. It's like, hey, we're just gonna kind of keep the drama away from him because he's gonna hurt feelings in the process. And I feel like that's also important that, you know, I think it's important that people just they gotta hear the truth sometimes.
Yes.
You know, obviously we're family. Nobody wants to hurt anybody's feelings, but sometimes it's necessary. And I feel like that's the only way that we really kind of grow into better relationships. And instead of pretending that things are okay or pretending or leaving things left unsaid, that's never really a good thing, because at the end of the day, we're family. We really can't necessarily get rid of each other, even though in a sense we can. But it's like, if we're going to continue to have this relationship and we have all of these things left unsaid, they're eventually going to boil over into a even bigger problem. So I'm always the one, like, if I got an issue, I'm just going to say it, because I don't want to hate you 10 years from now for something that I let boil over. Right. And then I build up this resentment towards you. And I think for a long time I had that issue with my mom because, like I said, in my youth, I didn't really have a safe space to really communicate. So there were so many things that I kind of let internalize and build up. And then when we did have this big fight, it's just kind of everything just kind of came boiling out to the point where we didn't talk for months because there was just this big resentment that I had towards her. And that's why it's so important now, where it's like, there's an issue, I'm just going to say it, because I don't want to sit there and have to resent you for 6 months or 7 months, because, you know, it's not healthy to have to tell people like, yeah, I'm not talking to my mom right now, or we haven't talked in 6-7 months. Right. And things like that can become hurtful, because not only was that the only person I kind of had growing up, she also did the best she could raising me, and she is owed a level of respect for that. So it's just good to just be able to speak my mind. So I'm glad you live your truth and you speak your truth, because that's very important. Because I'm the type of person where I do have a habit of holding grudges, because I feel like if I communicate something and I do the best I can with it, I say how I feel, this, that, and the third. If I don't feel like it's respected the correct way, I will take it personally.
Mhm.
Because I think it's important that we communicate effectively.
Yeah.
And if I tell you how I feel and you don't tell me how you feel, or you just kind of try to blow it off like it's not that big of a deal, I feel personally attacked, because I never try to make anybody's feelings feel invalidated, right? If you feel a certain way, you're entitled to that feeling, right? Big or small.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't necessarily think it's good if somebody tries to say, oh, you're tripping, or that's not that big of a deal, blah, blah, blah. Right. Because if it's a big deal to this person, God damn it, it's a big deal to them. Right.
Yeah.
And that's just what it is. So no, I think it's good to have boundaries set for, I think, pretty much every relationship in your life.
Completely.
Or whatnot. So no, it's
well,
pretty good.
Just allow it teaches people how they can treat you,
Right.
basically. So if you don't have them, and also not living in your truth is counterproductive, because it always comes out in the wash.
Yep.
Even if it's like 5 years later, it always comes out. So I feel like, for people that don't want to be in that space, and like a lot from my family who doesn't want to really look at things for what they are, the truth is just too confronting to them. And so they would rather just cut that out and move on. But that's, they will see that that's not how it actually works.
Right. And that is a thing I had to kind of learn with my mom, because she obviously had her own trauma growing up and whatnot. So I had to establish a boundary that certain things I'm not going to be okay with. So there is a certain way I have to talk to you. There's a certain way that I have to, bring things to your attention. There's a certain way I have to hang out around you, because I don't want to get to a place where I'm trying to overstep and I end up getting hurt myself, because you don't necessarily have the tools equipped to understand and to be able to hear where I'm coming from.
Right.
So I have to be understanding of that. And it's also one of those things where it's just like you get to a point where you just start to realize there's not really much you can do. Once people are kind of set in their ways, I mean, it's kind of hard to change them, especially the older they get.
Yes.
If they didn't confront them early on or at a particular time, they're just kind of stuck like that, and you just kind of have to accept it, unfortunately, whether it's good or bad. So
and we don't have control over what people do or what people say, which is such an easy statement to make, but such a difficult thing to actually live out in your life. To actually, it's easy to say like, well, I can't control what they say or how they, but when it's somebody that means something to you, that you care about, it can be really difficult, to really kind of live that.
Right. So it's really just one of those things where you just kind of take it for what it is. And I'm a firm believer in not necessarily stressing all that much over things I can't control and whatnot, because I feel like that's how I end up just beating myself up, because it's like, shit, I can't do anything about it, so I don't understand why I'm sitting here stressing. Like, if I could wake up tomorrow and tell my mom to do this and just she would do it, then god damn it, I wish that was the reality. But it's just not. I can't just tell her to do something and then expect her to be a night and day person. She was, she's her own human. She has grown and saw a way of doing things that she's gotten comfortable with, and I've just kind of have to set the boundary to know that, hey, I'm not okay with this, so I have to move a certain way around you or whatnot. And it was like that for a long time, but my mom has gotten phenomenally better.
Yeah.
through certain conversations and whatnot, and our relationship has grown exponentially over the last 5 years or so. And I'm grateful for it, and I'm grateful for the fact that we can continue to grow in such a positive rate. But so let's go back to when you first had your daughter. Knowing everything that you knew, everything that you went through, what was that experience like? In knowing that you had to be a mother, even though you didn't necessarily have the best mother figure to learn from.
Yes. I don't think I realized the validity of it, or the how powerful it was going to be, or how painful it was going to be, until I actually had her. It's like when you're pregnant, everyone tells you all these things and you're like, yeah, okay. And then the baby comes out and you're like, oh crap, like this is like a human. I have to take care of it. And all of my decisions like really matter. Like I'm making it for this person who would literally die without me. So I had to do a lot of work around that. I think I went back to therapy. I think I was going to therapy like 3 times a week when she was a baby, when she was an infant. I had a lot of just fear just in general. And obviously it was coming from a space of what had happened to me, but I manifested it into just like worrying about like her dying, or, you know, if I walked away from her for 5 minutes and she stopped breathing, like these were all the things that were constant in my head. And it was just because of the fear of, you know, something happening to her. And that was because I had such a, you know, hard time through my childhood. So I just had to do a lot of work around that, and I still do. And I think every age that they turn is different, and they become different. Now she's like her own little person with her own opinions, and they're very strong. So you know, I'm just having to, you know, they wind up teaching you so much more than you teach them. It's not even funny. I mean, she is, if you allow them to, and I think that might be what the problem kind of was back in the day. If you take away, you know, my abuse stuff and just my parents, is like, there was no space for a parent to, you know, parents didn't do that thing where they were like, you know what, I'm wrong. You're right. You know, I do that with her all the time. You know, I'll say to her, you know what, Capri, you're right. Mommy's got that one like completely wrong. And just being able to admit that, and you see what it, like how her face changes, that she feels seen, and that she feels like, okay, mommy is acknowledging, and I'm not just going like, no, I'm right, and drop it. Like, we're not talking about it anymore, which is how I grew up. It was pretty much, you know, like, this is what it is, and just stop talking about it. I really give her the space to, because I'm not right all the time. And I don't want her to think that, because then you turn 18 and then you realize like, oh my God, my parents are not perfect. And you've put them on this pedestal for 18 years. And then the reality sets in, and you realize that they're human, and that they made mistakes, and that things didn't always go as they should have. And then it's like a huge letdown. And then you have to go through that whole process of processing, you know, the fact that you thought your parents were A and they were actually B. And so I don't want her to ever feel that. I want her to feel like along the way, I always acknowledged when I was wrong, or when I didn't say the right thing or do the right thing, or, you know, which I think is really important.
Yeah. And how important is it for you to extend grace? So let's say the opposite happens, and, you know, mommy's right, you know, Capri is wrong. But how important is it to you to be like, hey, you know, it's okay to be wrong. Like, you know, we're not perfect. We're all human. Yeah. So how important is it to you to extend that grace to her?
I think it's important to do both ways.
Yeah.
And I think that there's 2 things that I try to do with her. One is that, you know, I do say to her a lot, you know, I'm not your friend, I'm your mother, because I think that is really important to, even though we're really changing the way we parent, and we're really trying to, I think, as a society, come from a more sensitive space where we're hearing our kids like we weren't heard. But also, I am very firm with her on that. No, I'm not your friend, and I'm your mother. And, you know, there is a certain respect that, you know, that you need to give mommy, and mommy needs to give you. Right. Like, if I said something like that to you, that would be really upsetting for you. Just like if mommy says it, you know, you say to mommy, it's upsetting to mommy. And so I think as much as I want her to feel all of the things that I also want her to understand that I'm still her mom and I'm not like her friend at school that she can just kind of be however with either. You know, I think that's important as well.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I think one thing I learned is, even in the relationship with me and my mom, is that, you know, of course it's important for a parent to discipline their child in the correct ways. But I also think it's important that a child disciplines the parent sometimes. Like, hey, you're wrong. Like, hey, you know what I'm saying? You said this wrong, or I didn't like the way that made me feel. I don't like the way you said that, blah, 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 or all sorts of things. And I think that's his own form of discipline that, you know, parents have to accept in order to be more understanding of the way their child thinks, because, you know, every human is different. Every person is different. Some people are going to be able to take things better than other people. Some people are going to be more sensitive. Some people are not. So it's in the relationship between my mom and I had to really help her understand that there are certain things I'm just not okay with. Like, I don't like the way certain things are being said. I don't like certain text messages. Like, it could be the littlest thing. Like, I'm going to make it known that, hey, I don't like to be treated this way. I don't like to be talked to this way. You know, I need you to do better if we are going to continue to build a positive relationship.
Yeah.
And, you know, even back when I was like 19, 20, obviously those conversations were a lot harder because we never had them. So she always took them as like, you're not going to tell me what to do and da-da-da-da. And I was just like, okay, I mean, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you how I want to be treated. And if you're not going to respect that, then, you know, this relationship is going to be a little bit harder than what it really has to be.
Right.
You know, so I think it's important that us as humans are comfortable with telling people how we want to be treated, like you said, because if not, people are just going to do whatever they want.
Yes.
And you're going to find yourself in situations that you're going to look in the mirror one day and be like, damn, I'm really being treated like terribly right now. And I've just been accepting it all this time. So, yeah, so it's pretty good that, you know, I hope one day when I do have kids that I'm able to allow them to tell me that I'm wrong, and I'm fine with that. Damn it, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Like, you got me, you know.
You will be. I can tell. You're gonna be just fine.
Yeah. So, but no, it's exciting. Even you know, even with my friends or family, like if I do something wrong, I always want somebody to tell me, because I never want to live my life knowing I did something and it made somebody feel a certain way and they never told me, and then it even becomes a situation where I do it again.
Yes.
You know, like, I don't want that to be a thing, you know, in any relationship in my life, you know. So, you know, most definitely. But I appreciate this book so much. I love the fact that you're opening up about your childhood traumas. I know it couldn't have been easy. I know even for me, talking about my childhood traumas is never an easy thing to do. Having the conversations with my brothers or my parent or my mom. The fact that my dad tried to slide back in 25 years later.
Your Instagram, it's crazy.
Yeah, so, and even in that kind of situation, it's always tricky because you never really know why somebody's trying to enter your life, especially when you reach a certain level of success. People try to slither their way back in for all sorts of reasons, and it's unfortunate that my dad possibly had that kind of outlook too, especially with somebody who's so close to the me being here. Like, I wouldn't be here without him or whatnot. But yeah, so I definitely appreciate this book. It was a great read. I'm encouraging everybody to go out there and grab one, read it 4 or 5 times. You read it front to back to front. it's definitely it's a book too where you don't necessarily have to start from the beginning,
Yeah.
even though it's important, but you kind of can just pick it up and just flip to any page or any chapter, and you're going to be like, wow, okay, this speaks to
Yeah.
me. And then you can flip
Yeah.
to another chapter and another portion of the book, and it's like, wow, this is one of those books where it is a full body of work that you can just really start from anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, like there's things on every page that can be a lesson in anybody's life.
Thank
You
you.
know, you did pretty good with that, and I appreciate you for that, and I appreciate you for your time. So again, guys, grab the
Thank
book,
you.
Glimmer. It is here. Phenomenal read. Great for anyone. And yeah, again, I appreciate your time. Shout out to Maddie for the connect.
Yes, absolutely.
Most definitely. But feel free to tell people what's next. I know you have this book and it's going so great. So what's kind of on the horizon?
Just, it's like we just keep promoting it and keep doing the thing. And who knows, I might start a podcast at some point. We'll see.
Yeah.
I don't ever say, have the door closed on anything.
Right. And with that being said, on anything, there's a possibility that you're going to continue to do stunts.
I'll probably do things here and there. We'll see.
Yeah. Most definitely. But again, I appreciate you so much. It was a phenomenal conversation. I've honestly taken so many different things from this, and just to hear you speak so candidly about the processes that you've gone through, the healing journey, hearing things about your family, your daughter, your husband. It's definitely been, I'm grateful to have known all of these things and to hear all of these things. And we've shared similar stories and the things that we've gone through and how we just continue to let that sun rise and we rise with it. So,
yes.
Yeah. But again, I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
If you have a podcast, I can't wait to listen to it. I know it's going to be great.
I'll have you on it. How's that?
Most definitely. I'll be there without a doubt. But again, guys, grab the book, give it a read, and it's life changing at the end of the day.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely, and just continue to keep being you. I know these type of processes never end. These type of healing journeys never end. At least mine don't. I continue to heal every day through my trauma, because one of those things that you realize is that those type of traumas are kind of never ending. They're always there. They sit on your soul. So you continue to heal through them every day. You continue to wake up and be a better version of yourself than you were yesterday.
Yeah.
And you keep spreading your story, and I am grateful to have known it and have it being brought to my attention. So yeah, I say all that to say we appreciate you. We love you, of course, and we love the book. And yeah, we're grateful for all of it.
So nice meeting you, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So again, shout out to you guys for listening on Spotify, Apple, on YouTube, checking in with the video, and go give Miss Kimberly Shannon Murphy, which is her Instagram name as well, a follow. And yeah, just continue to be great.